Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Yoga Break It Down. In this episode, we're going to go over lunge pose, and we're going to do a variation standing, and we're going to do some variations traditionally where you're on one knee. And that brings up that your knee is in charge. So if it is not comfortable in any way to perform the variation where you're on your knee, one, you can try cushioning. You can get a blanket to fold up underneath your knee, or some type of foam mat, but make sure that you don't block the part of your yoga mat where your standing foot would be, because you do need that traction. So if you are going to use some type of foam mat or blanket, make sure it's in the center part. If it's a longer foam mat, you can just crisscross the yoga mat and the foam mat. Lunges happen. In life, we are bending our knees as we get around. And if you're noticing discomfort in your knees, this is one space where you can really sort of check in to see what you are doing that might be contributing to the knee being uncomfortable, and then bring that into your stair climbing, your walking, so that you're not impacting the knee as much. We're going to start out with the standing version of lunge, because for many people to have the knee down on the mat or down on the floor is not comfortable even with cushioning. And it may be the impact of the knee on the mat or on the floor, or it may be the getting up and down. So in this first variation, I set up two chairs with the backs of the chairs facing inwards towards me, towards my mat. And that's so that they're there for support, which you may or may not use or use partially. I'm bringing one foot forward in between the chairs, and that's going to be the bending knee, the leg you're lunging into, and the other foot's coming back. In the first part of this variation, you'll see that the back foot I have at an angle. So part of that is you could have the foot pointing straight forward. If you do, you need to have the feet a little bit apart, because you're not trying to walk a tightrope, so the back foot would be a little bit to the side. So here I have the foot turned out a little bit in the back, and the heel is actually close to being in line with the line coming back from that front foot, but the toes are turning out a little bit. This is a position that I feel comfortable in, where I feel balanced, and where my heel can be on the floor. So we don't want to have such a far distance between the 2 feet that we can't place the heel on the floor. I have tight calves, so I tend to have the feet closer in. You may be more flexible in your calf and have more distance, but let's have heel on floor for this variation. So your choice if you're having that foot turned out a little bit or turned in. And like I've talked about before, we want the kneecap, we want the heel, the kneecap, and the hip in line. So if the foot's turning out a little bit, the entire leg is turning out just a little bit, so that that knee stays in line. Because otherwise, if you feel that upper leg rotating forward, same direction as you're facing, and you're turning your toes out, the twist is going to happen in your knee, which isn't helping. It sort of defeats the purpose of doing this pose as a standing pose. We sink forward with our hips to a point where the knee is directly over the ankle. If when you lunge fully forward, your knee goes beyond your ankle, you need to bring either the forward foot further forward or the back foot further back, create more distance between those feet, so that when you're lunging all the way forward, that front knee comes directly over the ankle. It's best structural support. If we were building a house, we would want to have things perpendicular to the ground, not at crazy angles. In this pose, we continue to sink the hips forward as simultaneously we sink back down through that back foot. You may keep your hands on the backs of the chairs. You may lift your arms overhead. Check in with the lower back. So keeping the torso sort of upright in this position, including when we raise our arms, or especially when we raise our arms, creates an arc in the back. If that's pinching your back, you do not need to practice with the back in that position. Look at the part where I'm leaning my torso a little bit forward so that there is a nice straight line in the spine. It's very comfortable. So traditionally you're going to see people back upright, often arms overhead. You do not need to do that. This other variation that I'm doing standing, I'm coming onto the ball of the back foot and continuing in my lunge. This position is called high lunge, and this is a common one in yoga classes. And just for the record, there are rarely folding chairs in yoga studios. So if you are not comfortable doing this freely in the middle of the room, you can opt out and you can go back to that variation where your foot and heel are on the floor where you're more comfortable. Next, we're going to be approaching this pose more traditionally on the mat. Remember that the space that I'm recording in has carpeting, and so my knee is cushioned. For you, if you're not practicing on a carpet, or even if the carpet is not enough cushioning, please get a folded blanket or some type of foam mat to cushion your knee. We do not want to endure discomfort in the knee at all, period. So guess what? I'm using blocks in this variation, and I'm using them at their highest height. You do not need to reach for the floor for most of this variation. So you want to place your two blocks underneath where you anticipate your shoulders being. So they're going to be somewhere outside of the foot or the heel, and you can adjust them later. So when you get down onto your mat with your cushioning on two knees, you're going to see if this is a deal breaker or not. The next space that you're going to see if this is a deal breaker, if being on the two knees was okay, is when you're bringing one foot forward. So if that is just too awkward, you cannot maneuver in that, or once you're in it, you just really feel uncomfortable in the knee or with your stability, even with the blocks, this may be a deal breaker, and you may opt for the standing variations. If you have your foot forward, oftentimes we feel so relieved we got our foot forward, but then you look down at your alignment and you realize you barely got your foot forward. You may not even have the heel down, and then often the knee is sticking out way beyond the heel and the ankle. So unfortunately, you felt like you achieved something, but you probably still have to bring that forward foot further forward. So make sure that you've allowed enough space on the mat to do that. Again, you want to have your knee over your heel. So that can be done by bringing the forward foot further forward. You can also adjust by bringing the back knee further back. So whichever seems more manageable to adjust. Use the blocks as needed. You can always touch with fingertips, fists, or palms, whatever's most comfortable for the wrists. I often use the fists or the fingertips because when I put my palms down, that tends to really lean me forward, where for the traditional pose, I really want to lift up in the chest and the torso, and when I lightly touch the block with the fingertips or the fists, it tends to inspire that lift up in the torso. Check in to see if where you put your blocks is really keeping your wrists underneath the shoulders. Adjust them if needed. If you do have the torso upright and there's pinching in your lower back, this is where you would lean the torso forward a little bit until you feel that the spine's in a nice diagonal line, and it's going to be more comfortable for most people. If you feel steady, you can work on bringing your arms overhead. Some people bring a hand or both hands to their upper leg first and sort of test it out and then raise the arms. Again, raised arms arcs the back, so you might lean forward into a little bit of a diagonal. Make sure to do this pose on both sides. In any yoga pose, we might be spending up to a minute just getting into the pose. Then you want to spend some time breathing into it. There's no set time frame, but certainly give yourself at least a few breaths, and it's not unusual to hang out and breathe into a pose, making your adjustments for a couple minutes. You put a lot of work to get into this pose, so you may as well enjoy the benefits. You could also do this variation on the floor with chairs at your side if you like something higher, and instead of turning the backs of the chair in towards you, you could turn the chair so that the seats are towards you so that it's a little bit lower. See what feels most secure for you. In lunge, you're going to feel stretches in your legs, in your hips, possibly your back if you're incorporating the arc. As you can see, when we are in the full lunge with right alignment, there's a diagonal line from knee to knee. You are in a splits-like position without the lower legs coming into it. So you're receiving the benefits that people would in a full splits. I don't practice a full splits. You may not either. So this might be as close as we ever come. So enjoy that deep stretch. And notice just the wide range of motion that your hips are achieving in this. So for this next variation, we are going to play around with going into this stretch a little bit more. So I'm using my blocks, I'm coming into it normally, and then once I've settled into lunge, I'm going to take the block from the outside of my forward leg, I'm going to bring it on the inside. Then what you would need to do is shimmy or walk that forward foot out to the side a little bit, still pointing straight forward. We're not turning it out, so pointing forward, but a little bit to the side. This opens the hip and it creates that room so both of your hands feel comfortable reaching forward in front of you and the blocks are aligned fine. Then you can make contact with the blocks in any way that you want. And I'm showing here some different block variations where it might be high enough that you can bend your elbow and rest your forearms on these blocks. So even though I'm often encouraging you to relax into these poses, we often tense up, especially with the arms straight. So one benefit of having the forearms on the blocks is it bends the elbows so the lower arm is relaxed, the wrist can relax, and it also inspires the shoulders to let go a little bit. I tend to keep my head somewhat in line with the spine as I do this. My spine is not rounded, it's straight at a diagonal, and I'm working on lowering the whole torso, not collapsing into it. As you start to sink into this pose, you may feel that you could go a little bit further, but your thigh flesh is in the way. So you can see in this adjustment that I do on each side, I sort of rotate the upper leg open a little bit. I lean the knee out to the side, let my torso pass, and then straighten the leg a little bit. It doesn't seem like I go down a lot, but it makes a huge difference. That thigh is just sticking out and getting in the way. If you feel comfortable in the first block configuration, bringing your forearms down to it, you can stack those blocks in different ways and go a little lower. You can really customize it with the blocks. And you may even get to having your forearms on the floor. If your forearms do get to the floor, your back is probably rounded there, certainly. If you feel stable with the hands on the blocks, forearms on the blocks, hands or forearms on the floor, you might go into a high lunge here, curling the back toes under, lifting the knee up. I like this variation because I really get into a full stretch. What you want to do is extend the back knee further back as you lunge the hips further forward, and you're just going to feel a stretch all throughout the legs and hips there. Be cautious as you're lowering your knee, as you're bringing that forward leg back and coming out of the pose. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Yoga Break It Down. Remember that every body can use yoga. So hairstylists need yoga, rocket scientists need yoga, Oprah needs yoga, and you, especially you, baby, you need yoga. I'll see you next time. Bye.